All right, everyone, before we get started today, I need to tell you about our amazing teammates at Darby Communications. If you run an outdoor, an endurance, or an active lifestyle brand, there is no better PR or digital marketing belay partner or drinking buddy than Darby. They can help your business reach new heights, and they might just keep you from falling on your ass. Since we started working with Darby, more and more people have been reaching out to us here at the Rock Fight because of that messaging. Look, guys, if they can help us, they can help anybody. Hit them up at darbycommunications.com. Do it today. Welcome to the Rock Fight, where we speak our truth, slay sacred cows, and sometimes agree to disagree. This is an outdoor podcast that aims for the head. I'm Colin True. It's Monday, and today we'll be taking a look at some big picture news to come out of the outdoor industry in the past week. But before we get to that, come back to the Rock Fight this Wednesday, guys, when outdoor journalist Justin Hausman and I will be taking a look at the latest headlines to come out of the outdoor adventure community. This week, we'll likely be touching on layoffs at our national parks and what we expect to happen there. Also, come back on Friday, where I'm hoping I'll be able to tell you all about my time at this week's Outdoor Market Alliance Media event that happens this week in Denver. It's Monday, so you only have one more day to subscribe to Rock Fight's weekly newsletter. News from the front, head to rockfight.co. Click join the mailing list or just use the pop-up that shows up there when you get to the website so you don't miss a thing from the Rock Fight universe. And lastly, if you're new around here, please subscribe and join the Rock Fight by lobbing a little stone, a little pebble at the follow button on whatever podcast app you are listening to us on. And also, guys, please give us that 5-star rating. And all right, let's start the show.
Welcome to the Rock Fight, Rock Fight, Rock Fight.
All right, well, joining producer Dave and myself, like he does every week here on the Rock Fight, is outdoor industry insider and our own consigliere, Eoin Comerford. We're just going to get into it this week. No open from me. We're getting in with the three of us on a bunch of topics coming up. What is going on, Eoin? How we doing?
Great. Just had a lovely weekend. Did some kayaking, some snorkeling. It's lovely down here in Key Largo.
It's probably, there's no park rangers to get in the way anymore, right? There's just no one kind of stopping you from going wherever you want.
Absolutely. No
one collecting fees.
No. We're just picking bits of coral off of the park. No one's there to say a damn
empty
thing.
The trash cans. Yeah. Dave, how we doing?
It's 39 and raining right now here in Portland, Oregon. So we are not
February 16th.
We are not scuba diving. We are not snorkeling.
You could be.
We could be.
That's
right. That's right.
Why not? There's a river. There's a big old river in Portland. So you can just dive right in.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about. And today's opening shot, it's really the main topic of the entire episode. We have one other thing afterward, but it's presented by Garage Grown Gear, which is your hub for ultralight gear. Learn more by heading to garagegrowngear.com. And like I said, we have three stories that came out last week that we want to talk about today that are honestly kind of connected in that they can teach us about the overall health of the outdoor industry. And this past week, you posted on LinkedIn about the poor earnings results in the outdoor division at Newell that they had in 2024. Newell is the parent company of Marmot, Ex Officio, and Coleman, among several others. And they reported as being down 21% with their outdoor brands last year. And as we talked about off air last week, the three of us, it kind of goes back to the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago about the outdoor industry being in a similar weakened state that the surf industry once was before it effectively collapsed and became a shadow of itself, with organizations like Authentic Brands becoming the largest and primary player of a lot of once iconic brands. Maybe they're still iconic, but they're the owner of a lot of different brands that really were super meaningful in that space. So when you're looking at these results, and you posted about it on LinkedIn, like I said, how does this info play into that theory, right? That the outdoor industry, there may be some risk here.
So I think before we dive into that, just for the sake of our listeners that may not be familiar with the whole Authentic Brands saga, I'm going to give hopefully a fairly quick rundown of kind of what happened. So if you go back to April of 19, Authentic Brands acquired Volcom, which, great brand in the sort of the surf and then snow space. So coming out of that, some ex-Volcom executives set up Liberated Brands to run Volcom's global retail and wholesale operations under license from Authentic Brands. Okay. Fast forward October 21, Authentic Brands acquires Spyder, iconic, some would say, maybe not, Snow brand.
No, Liberty they definitely are.
Yeah, sure. Liberty takes that one over too, because they've now become sort of the de facto sport outdoor player for Authentic. and did quite well. I mean, they did over 400 million in 22 for Liberty Brands. That is okay. So
Liberty or Liberated? Is there a difference?
Sorry, Liberated. You're right.
Okay, so
yes,
Liberated did 400 million in 21. This is post-pandemic with
22,
the main, the flagship brands. 22 being Volcom and Spider are kind of their flagship brands at this time.
Correct.
Okay.
So let's fast forward to September 2023, right? So barely 18 months ago, Authentic acquires Board Riders for 1.3 billion, right? And again, Board Riders is this conglomerate that had all of these cool surf, some snow, but mainly surf brands: Billabong, Quicksilver, Ruka, Roxy, all these brands, right? And once again, they turn to Liberated to run them. And they run the retail and the wholesale operations for a lot of these brands, right? So then last year, they got hit with a post-COVID slump, combined with trying to ingest all these brands into Liberated, and the cash flow becomes a huge issue. And basically, that led them to actually spin out the Spider business in November. There wasn't much talk about that. And then, but more meaningfully, Authentic yanked the licensing agreements for most of those brands in December, right? So they yanked both the wholesale and the retail piece. So really, this just put Liberated into a world of hurt. All kinds of bank lending loan issues in January, which finally then led to them declaring Chapter 11. That's Liberated declaring Chapter 11 for the U.S. operations in just earlier this month, like a couple of weeks ago. And they've started to liquidate all of their U.S. retail locations. So it's like 120 some retail locations for these brands that they were operating, for Billabong, for Volcom, and all of these, right? And really, it's just left the whole surf industry in a bit of disarray because, you have independent surf stores that actually bought up on these brands to get wholesale product into their stores for the spring season that's not showing up. And B, there's this incredibly promotional environment that's out there where Liberated is just basically flushing all of this inventory at 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever off, right? That's just absolutely, going to kill demand. So it's a tough spot for the industry right now.
We could probably spend a lot of time just unpacking everything you just said, right? I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things in there, and the brands involved and the strategy and what's next and all that kind of stuff. But just to kind of bring it back to the outdoor of it all, because the surf industry, why we keep saying it's been potentially be a cautionary tale, surf industry is about basically 10 years behind or ahead of the outdoor industry, right? 1960s is kind of at the time the surf industry really comes up to be a force. 70s is kind of when the outdoor industry really starts, kind of similar ebb and flow from growth and wholesale and retail and brands and whatnot, kind of leading us to today, and including things like media. And this is the second time in a month we've talked about this. We covered the Authentic Liberated deal as the bankruptcy happened a few weeks ago, and alluded to it as a comp for what's happening in the outdoor industry. So I guess ultimately, why do we continue to harp on this? Like, why do those similarities kind of lead us to believe of like where we can end up being in the outdoor industry and maybe the not too distant future?
I mean, for me, the parallels are very clear in terms of segments where it was founded based upon an authentic user group that spawned authentic founders that built businesses that ultimately then grew way beyond the wildest dreams of the original founders.
Right.
And then led to consolidation, et cetera. And here is where we are today.
It's funny that obviously why authentic brands called themselves authentic brands, right? It's just so easy to kind of like, you said authentic like 3 times in that sentence. It's like, yeah, that's what we lead on. And it is also funny when you think about some of just the inherent bullshit in both industries of, well, we make stuff that's used to get outside and, get up the mountain or get in the ocean or whatever. And it's like, no, actually like 98% of what we make is made to like wear to the mall on a Saturday with your kids.
I mean, you look at Marmot as an example, right? Perfect example here. Founded in the early 70s by a few guys who were, into mountaineering, into being outdoors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that founder group then drove some real innovation in the outerwear category through the 70s and into the 80s, right? I mean, they were the first brand to use Gore-Tex on a jacket, right? Yeah. Who talks about that about Marmot? First brand to have pit zips. First brand to have elasticized storm skirts, right? I mean, these are real innovations that we just sort of take for granted today that didn't exist before Marmot, okay? Velcro sleeve closures. This is all Marmot, right? And all driven by that original founder group. But that was like the first 20 years of Marmot. What has happened in the intervening, 30 years of Marmot, right? I mean, really. And so, they were acquired by K2 in 2004, who was
Yep.
then acquired by Jarden. You remember the Jarden Group thing?
Oh, yes,
In
I remember that.
2007, who was then acquired by Newell in 2016, and who will ultimately probably be sold to Authentic Brands in 2025, 26.
Yeah, this always comes back to a lot of that. I mean, you go back to our conversation last week on the top 5 gear brands, and we talked, a lot, especially at Nemo at number 1, about still being founder led, right? It just feels like at some point, if you sell off your brand, which by the way, I understand that's the goal for a lot of folks, like sell the brand off, cash out. Hey man, I did my work.
Yeah.
I'm good now.
Right.
But at some point, that authenticity will wane once you're sort of, owned by a publicly traded entity or just some big corporate, VC, PE, whatever it is. Dave, take a minute and talk about the cyclical nature of this, right? Like we talked about this when we made that podcast Layers, a lot about the surf industry and its influence in the outdoor industry, especially as it pertained to media and then products. When you look at the, I don't know, kind of the sea of sameness we have in the outdoors, I mean, do you see kind of similar markers over the last 30, 40 years and the surf side where they kind of led us to this place on the authentic side?
Absolutely. I mean, sea of sameness. If you look at just the way the surf apparel industry has grown up, it's been lived on a sea of sameness. It's on a boat out in the harbor, all looking the same, but they all position themselves as that authentic place, right? They come from the culture, they promote the culture, they support the culture. All of these things are required to kind of keep that going. And this is, where we run into some of the issues that we've seen with the surf industry as it gets consolidated and brought into more of a corporate holding. That support goes away. When that support goes away, it impacts the media ecosystem. That is the kind of consolidator of that industry, of that culture. Where do they go to find who's doing what is cool, what is not, kind of idea. It's the belonging. It also affects the the IRL contests and promotions, the things that generate the content that goes in those media, right? The gathering places, whether it's the US Open of Surf or if it's the big wave challenges, things like that. Those brands are vital for Spartan. And then there's the athletes that they then make possible to do that by giving them money to have a lifestyle that they can then go, and the photographers that then promote that, and the content creators, right? All of this is required to keep a vertical sport up, right? And without those elements, you're not going to see a future in it. And that's what makes the authentic piece of just, let's just say, the surf aspect or the action sport aspect, because skate is not immune from that, right? They're tied to it. Snowboard, in this little sense, has a little bit more autonomy because of its kind of relationship to ski and the resort aspect, but they're part of it as well. And you can see they've kind of settled into this niche where in the 90s and early 2000s, it was all growth, right? Big. And the surf and skate and snow, they all saw themselves as this singular identity. That was the kind of the big revelation here in the late 80s into the 90s. You start to see these independent niche sports all realize that they have a shared psychographic consumer, and so that their power was together as action sport is what, that kind of nomenclature for it. But at least it created a retail story and consolidated these different groups. And there was definitely crossover, even though some of it not at all. I mean, core skaters were core skaters. They were not going to go snowboarding or surfing, but you could definitely see the Venn diagrams all connect to these. And it created this bigger culture. And with outdoor, what we see is that there's nothing to fill in the consolidation aspect. Right, as we go forward, I mean, we're talked about outside a lot. There's this hollowing out of our media space. And if brands aren't going to advertise in the media to keep it, then there's going to be no voices to connect our culture. And if there's no voices connecting our culture, they're not going to buy the brands. They're not going to visit the outdoor specialty. I mean, it's just kind of continues downhill from that. But that I think is the big issue here, that this corporate consolidation is just one brick in this wall that is being built up that could one day kind of separate us from the very small core adherence to a broader appreciation of the sports. And I mean, I hate to, and to nature itself. I mean, let's face it. These are, the best advertisement for nature and getting outside is the outdoor industry, right?
I never had you pegged as a Pink Floyd guy. Just another brick in the wall. That's
right,
you.
Right. I'm more of a Final Cut, but.
Taking a more optimistic point of view, is outside a little bit more shielded from the worst outcome of this than maybe surf is? Because you look at, I don't know what's really happening in surf independent media. And working with Justin for as long as I have, I feel like I would know at this point. And at the same time, in the absence of you point of like a dominant media presence, Dave, like on an outside, we are getting the adventure journals, the mountain gazettes, the trail magazines. Like there does seem like we do still see some of these more founder-led brands, the Livsons, the Naras and stuff starting to crop up. And again, it could all be happening on the surf side in equal measure, and I'm just not familiar with it. Does it sort of feel like there's maybe a reason to be optimistic in the face of some of this, or no? It's
like it'll always exist, right? But you still need a broader pull, and that's why
Right.
we're always interested in REI, right? I mean, you need that broad pull.
Here's what I'd say is one of the challenges with the surf industry is that it is so location specific as to where you can actually participate in the activity that underlies that industry, right?
Right.
The great thing about the outdoor industry is the outdoors is pretty much everywhere. I mean, you could argue that it isn't in the middle of Manhattan, but you also could argue that it is. But most people,
Central Park people who would tell you that it is probably
right. But most people, you can walk out your back door and you can at least walk, and hopefully you're relatively close to some place where you can go
Right.
mountain biking or trail running or whatever. And so it's way, way more accessible for people to be involved in the core activity that underlies our industry. So that's the good news, right? But if we're not doing a good job as an industry promoting those activities, right, then I think that's where we potentially are in danger.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, the access to be able to participate is it's no comparison when you take an isolated, localized sport like surfing and then just access to outdoor. But what surf did, the latest, or action sports did, is that they sold more than just the activity. They were selling, and at that point, the California lifestyle.
Yeah, the vibe.
This idea of the vibe. They were also individual sports that were different from the team stick and ball sports that had always gotten the kind of attention. So it created a new. And then if you look at actually the way music grows up with that, you have grunge and you have hip hop coming up at the same time, both very rebellious individual kind of expressions that go along with that. So that's a bigger movement. Mm-hmm. But if you take what we have today, we're missing, though, the inspiration. Like you said, it's not the promoting, it's the aspiration. It's the let's inspire people to want to go outside, not just buy this item because it does this, that, and the other thing. Nike has kept sports alive because of their ability to create aspiration to their core adherents as well as a larger case. American tennis back in the 80s and 90s wouldn't have been what it was if it wasn't for Nike pushing ads of their athletes on football games. Right, things like that, and that's just a very cool example. But the brands need to step up, and actually, if they want to inspire people, they need to do the kind of communication that does that, and not just put their product up for sale at a price.
I think you just answered my last question was going to be like, why does any of this really matter, right? And how has the consumer suffered in this? Because you can still get stuff, you can still go do the sports. Why does this truly matter? And I think that's kind of what you're intimating. And the other piece that obviously is, there is a financial impact if this all starts to go sideways and we lose doors and retailers and whatnot. And it can take, everyone loves publishing the $1 trillion outdoor industry. It's like, well, there could be a world where that declines. And so that actually plays into the next story that I want to talk to you guys about, because according to Retail Dive last week, Dick's Sporting Goods has quietly taken steps to roll back their presence in outdoor. Per that article, Dick's has reduced their public lands locations from 8 to 3. They have shuttered their last 3 running Moosejaw shops, as well as redirected Moosejaw's website to the Public Lands website. Now, we all know that Dick's is more bullish on their House of Sport model, which I predicted. Want to make sure I tell everybody that again. I predicted that. But at this point in time, losing outdoor retail doors, kind of what we were just talking about. I understand maybe we're talking more specialty in the previous conversation, but losing doors, it hurts our industry. So, Owen, I don't have the exact numbers of stores open versus stores that closed last year, but between what happened with Dick's and Eastern Mountain Sports in 2024, I would think it's safe to say that the only entities that probably expanded their footprint in a meaningful way was probably REI and Sierra. I know places like Gearhead Outfitters and folks like that, they opened some new shops and did some acquisitions. But in terms of the big guys with a larger presence, those are the two that really seem to make any movement in terms of expansion. What do we lose when there is attrition among total places we can shop for outdoor products?
Well, I mean, in terms of public lands, obviously, I know a lot more than I could probably talk about around that subject. But what I would tell you is at a macro level, public lands is ultimately, it's a victim of bad timing in many ways. So it launched in 21 and into 22, right? So just as the COVID boom was starting to ebb, and we went into the last 2 years that have, let's face it, not been fun for the industry. So that was the first thing. The second thing that happened at the same time, so at the same time that Dick started down the public lands thing, it launched House of Sport. And both elements, right, it was about Dick's trying to find its next growth format, because it was somewhat saturated in terms of the markets that the regular Dick's Sporting Goods stores were in, right? And so what happened was, Public Lands didn't get off to a great start. House of Sport just knocked it out of the park, right out of the bat, just killing it, right? And so realistically then, in a world of limited investment dollars, Dick said, well, we're going to put all of our money behind House of Sport because it's rocking and rolling. And we're just going to kind of see, what we can do with this public lands thing. And ultimately, the public lands going from 8 to 3, or not, actually, I think it was actually 9 to 3. It was really the only 3 stores that remain are the 3 standalone stores. So the 6 stores that are no longer public lands were all the ones that were co-located next to a Dick's Sporting Goods store. And so now what Dick's is going to do is they're going to take at least half of those are going to become House of Sport, because it's 100, together they're over 100,000 square feet. And then I think the other 3 are going to become more like the Field House concept, which is it's an upgraded Dick's Sporting Goods, but without the outdoor fields and all the extra stuff that you'd get with the House of Sport. But, ultimately, so what does this mean? I think it was interesting. One of the big early successes of public lands was attracting really most of the really key specialty outdoor brands that Dick's themselves had not been able to attract for years. And the reason that they were able to do that was because those outdoor brands, they saw this as the potential to create a competitor for REI, right? The brands in the industry, quite frankly, hate the fact that our industry is structured the way that it is. They hate that REI has so much power and is so concentrated at the top of the industry and can basically dictate everything. REI basically dictates the promotional calendar of our industry, right? It dictates so many other things, and brands, quite frankly, don't love that. And so what's happening is, without a public lands, we're back to this really kind of clunky, bifurcated industry where we've got this one massive player at the top, and then we've got this whole bunch of independent specialty retailers sort of at the bottom. They're both together big numbers, but it's very difficult for a brand to kind of deal with those 2 elements in a single industry.
What does that portend for the ability for a challenger to ever rise up? Is it possible, if Dick's can't make it happen with their kind of install base to be able to kind of prop up another outdoor alternative, is one possible?
And they're not the first to try, right? I mean, people forget, we talk about EMS a lot. EMS was west of the Mississippi at one point. They had shops in Boulder. They were trying to become the alternative to REI as well. And I mean, it's more complicated than they just couldn't do that because it's EMS.
That tracks, though. Those of us on the West Coast look at Boulder as Eastern Mountains. That's cool.
Yes.
I think it is possible. Dick's took a Dick's approach to it, is what I would say, which maybe wasn't the right approach. Whereas you look at, you mentioned Gearhead Outfitters, you look at what they're doing, and there's something to be said for that approach, which is to say, hey, listen, it's more of a kind of a classic retail roll-up strategy. But it's taking that model and it's applying it to other players in key locations. So I think there is the potential for something like that to grow to a meaningful level. The other piece, that I would love to see is for Grassroots Outdoor Alliance to actually step up and really occupy the space that it could occupy in terms of being a true go-to-market entity. So for example, having the ability for Grassroots Outdoors to be a consumer-facing thing, where the consumers could go to it, and all of these retailers, let's say they share a single web presence or something, similar to what I was mentioning earlier, an earlier podcast about Sport 2000 in Germany, where you can truly have the power of independent specialty retailer brought together to compete sort of head to head with REI.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and talking with Gabe Meyer, who heads the GOA, they cop to this. Like the name GOA only means something, Grassroots Outdoor Alliance, if you're in the industry. No one on the outside knows, right? That's just the outdoor shop. Like, oh, we're in the GOA, no one cares. So that would be an opportunity, though, right? To kind of say, like, make GOA branded or endorsed a thing, so that people understand, like, oh, this is something we need to get behind. I think that is
like there could be a loyalty program aspect to it where you've got shared loyalty. I mean, trust me, I understand all the reasons why it won't happen.
Oh, it says easy, does hard, right?
Exactly. It will probably never happen, but it would be incredible what it could do for our industry if it could happen.
Well, and Gearhead Outfitters, though, they're a GOA member. And, I think we mentioned them. I mentioned them, you mentioned them, and they are up to, I think, 18 doors now. I mean, and if you talk to Ted, who's the owner of Gearhead, he's passionate about specialty retail. He's not looking to become the next REI. He's interested in Gearhead being specialty driven, right? That experience that we all have when you walk into a shop and go like, oh yeah, I'm in my place, right? That we all love.
This is something that we at Moosejaw were looking to do, quite frankly, back in mid-teens, just because we saw the landscape, we saw the fact that, quite frankly, there's a whole bunch of folks that own independent specialty retailer stores that really don't have a strategy for what comes next. They're in their 60s, they're in their 70s. It's been a great living, but they'd like to retire. But who's what's the strategy? Who's going to buy that store? And we felt like that we could bring the Moosejaw brand presence, the Moosejaw website aspect to it, and then but take on that local store mantle as well. Unfortunately, we just didn't have the investors lined up to make that happen.
It's interesting you say that because been reading too about Barnes and Noble has righted their ship based on exactly that model, going back the other direction from the kind of mono experience to try to give the local stores more independence from their merchandising to their purchasing to their decor, right? Which is really kind of in line with what you're talking about. So maybe that is the future. Though I do think that maybe Dick's just has a branding problem with public lands. With the way the climate is today, maybe something called private lands would be a little more applicable.
You could have a loyalty,
loyalty oath programs, right? Mm-hmm, restricted usage.
Right.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the last story that came out last week that applies to what we're talking about here. We'll be right back. You're listening to Rock Fight Radio. Oh, you got DJ CT back with you spinning the hits, and it's that time because we have another new song from that hit machine, Fitz. And Fitz wants to ask you, why just settle for a smart sock when you can opt for a smarter sock?
You've got a million choices lying on the floor. Thin ones, thick ones, even some you never wore. But there's a sock whose specs rise above the rest. Don't settle for a smart one when the smarter sock is best. Opt for the smarter sock. Fitz. Fitz is the smarter sock. Fitz. Whole foot comfort is the answer to the question of the knit. Fitz. Opt for the smarter sock. Fitz. Whole foot comfort is the goal. It's only common sense with 4 different patents. The difference is immense. The Y line's added volume really is legit to the next level. Comfort of the fit we call Fitz. Opt for the smarter sock. Fitz. Fitz is the smarter sock. Fitz. Whole foot comfort is the answer to the question of the knit. Fitz. Opt for the smarter sock. Fitz. The smarter sock. Fitz. Fitz is the smarter sock. Fitz. Whole foot comfort is the answer to the question of the knit. Fitz. Opt for the smarter sock. Fitz.
And now, back to the show. All right, coming back. The last piece that we want to talk about that came out this past week, or a couple of announcements that came out on the event side of things. 2 announcements. The first being that Summer ISPO has been canceled, so there will be no large-scale European industry gathering this year. And the second, that Outdoor Retailer is launching a industry day that will include several educational tracks and will take place the day before Outdoor Retailer is set to kick off. Dave, you and I had plenty of memories from the trade show previously known as Friedrichshafen. Any thoughts on its demise?
Well, before we forget that, I think it's actually not. I don't think it's ISPO Summer. I think it's called Outdoor.
Correct.
It is
so
outdoor.
ISPO runs it. So
right. Sorry.
I don't know
point.
if you want.
It is technically outdoor. It is also Summer ISPO, though. Right?
I was
it's
actually giving you the option. Do you want to re-record that intro?
Oh, do you want me to? Or I think this is funnier if you call me out. Actually,
I was trying not to.
All I'm
trying to make you sound.
We're
smart.
leaving it in.
SMRT, smart.
It is outdoor with a capital D.
Fine.
So that part I know.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
Yes.
There you go.
The D is for Deutschland.
We're honest.
What do you think? What do you think about old Friedrichshafen, current outdoor, aka Summer ISPO going away?
Look, they're not immune from the same forces that we're dealing with here. I mean, Friedrichshafen was awesome as a core event, bringing up kind of specialty out. Friedrichshafen's a couple hours from Munich, so it was on the lake, kind of away from the city. It really had a great, kind of sequestered kind of feel to it.
Lots of hotels with no air conditioning.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of had kind of came to my piece when they announced its closure a few years ago. Of and ISPO always made more sense if they were going to do that in Munich, just from an accessibility perspective and just kind of consolidation piece.
Oh, and we talked about ISPO when it happened this past fall, and you were over there, and you noted just how much smaller it was. And even when Outdoor was in Friedrichshafen, it's still a much bigger show than a lot of the ones we have here in the States. And I imagine the summer versions of it when it moved to Munich was similar. And ISPO, obviously, in the winter was always a massive show, and it was significantly smaller as you noted when you were on the show here, talk about it last fall. What are your predictions for how events play out in the next couple of years based on this news?
I really see the pausing, as they're calling it, of ISPO, of ISPO Outdoor. It's like the final armistice in the outdoor brand trade show arms race, right? That really sort of typified the 2010s, because what happened was these outdoor brands, the booths just kept getting bigger and bigger and taller and multi-level, right? And it was like, I'm bigger than you, and North Face versus Columbia versus whatever. And
not even just like Nerona. I mean, I know Nerona's bigger over there, but like everybody had a big booth. Everybody.
Oh, it was crazy. And they were, brands were spending millions of dollars on these booths and the shows and all the people and all the things, right? And so ultimately, somebody, I think it was maybe Arc'teryx, was the first one to go, what the hell are we doing here? And they got out of it and then didn't really miss it. I was like, oh, okay, that was cool. We saved a whole bunch of money. And so if that was OR, the European version was twice that. I mean, that was just, huge booths, crazy, just everywhere. Yeah. So everybody kind of pulled back, and but what people then really missed was the ability to come together, to share ideas, to talk about what drives our industry. So ultimately, what the industry is looking for today is more gathering and less trade show. I mean, that's the balance, right? Yeah, and absolutely. So like one of the good things that's come out of this is both Outdoor Retailer and now Switchback, they have said, hey, the maximum booth size you can have is a 20 by 20. That's it. You can't have these mega booths. You can't do that. And it's kind of like a salary cap in professional sports. It's basically saving the brands from themselves, right, to where they don't go wild ass crazy and spend on these things, but it makes much more sense, right? So it brings it back to be affordable. It also actually, I think in the future is going to help emerging brands, because an emerging brand can get a 10 by 10 booth and not be overshadowed by this behemoth next to them. So I think that's great, and that's good for the future of trade shows. But ultimately, we have to make sure that the gathering piece works. And so I do like what OR is doing with their industry day. I think it's the right move for them from that perspective.
Does the industry day move the needle for them? I mean, it's kind of tough times, I feel like, for our friends in Salt Lake City here. You know, Sean Smith's been on the pod a lot. Hopefully we'll have him on again soon. You know, I don't want to kick any dirt, but it's like you're putting on the industry day now will be the first day of exhibition at Switchback. So if you're going to Switchback, and as probably you heard on the ads here on the Rock Fight, I mean, there's a lot of good brands that are big brands that are going to be going to Switchback. You know, does you feel like this moves the needle for them?
I don't know. It's going to be tough given the timing, quite frankly. But, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think we should be in the business here of prematurely crowning or killing a trade show, right? I mean, let's see how it all plays out in June. Let them fight it out. But, you know, in the immortal words of Highlander, I think ultimately there can be only one.
That's true. Who said it
That
first?
was a solid reference there.
Thank you.
Was it Kurgan? Who said it first? There's somebody said it first in that movie. Was it the Kurgan? I can't remember. Great movie, though. Kind of holds up, actually, if you go back and watch it.
It does.
All right, guys, all of that, every little bit of that which you just heard was made possible thanks to Garage Grown Gear. Garage Grown Gear brings you the best in ultralight backpacking gear, from the most innovative to the most head-scratching and quirky solutions to the problems you never knew you had while out backpacking. A toothbrush that fits on the end of your spoon handle? Yes. A Dyneema cover to cover the spoon itself? Yes. Dave, there is a spoon in this case. They've all got it at GGG. Check out garagegrowngear.com to discover the latest. Thanks to those guys for sponsoring the podcast.
It's time for a party shot.
And last thing today, guys, we're going to do kind of a combined parting shot because we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on what's been happening in the early days of the Trump administration as it applies to the outdoor industry. This week, there was growing pressure to hold account organizations whose name was on a pre-inauguration endorsement of Trump's Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum. That endorsement was put out by the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable on January 14th and included organizations that had signed that letter, signed by People for Bikes, the Outdoor Industry Association, and REI. Since the inauguration, there has been an increase in scrutiny given Burgum's position, according to an article by Reuters, to execute Trump's energy plan. And then most publicly this past week, REI launched a petition to, quote, call on Secretary Doug Burgum to rescind the sweeping orders undermining the public lands enjoyed by millions of Americans each year. Blowback came swiftly, as often happens with REI, with many calling out REI for signing the endorsement to then only a month later put up this petition. Kind of a mess, like everything in the early days of this administration. But Owen, you know, let's start with you. You know, what are your thoughts on just sort of the whole situation here?
I mean, I do think REI's signing of the endorsement was a misstep, especially with how sickeningly fawning the ORR letter was. I mean, just read it. Anyway, but ultimately, I think the reason that REI signed up was because one of their big pushes from a policy perspective from their government affairs group was the founding of outdoor recreation offices, both at the state and at the national level. And so, you know, Doug did that for North Dakota. So he seemed like, you know, a decent pick from that perspective, right? Yeah. And then, you know, I'm a big believer in looking for the silver lining in everything in life, right? And I think the silver lining here is that if REI hadn't signed on that and hadn't received all the blowback that it did, they probably wouldn't have come out quite as forcefully as they have with this opposition to, you know, the whole drill baby drill policies that we're hearing now out of the Department of the Interior, right? And so, you know, it's like at least REI is saying something, whereas like where are the other brands? Where's Patagonia? Where's North Face? Where is every other, fucking brand that used Bear's Ears as a convenient excuse not to go back to Salt Lake City? You know, where are all the brands that posted black squares, you know, after George Floyd was murdered? Where are they? So either all of that was performative bullshit, or they're scared chicken shit and they don't want to stick their head out of the sand. I mean, I just don't know.
Dave, what do you got on this?
That was well said. I don't know what else to say there.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Right. I think a couple things. Number one, you're absolutely right. The tone of the letter is the issue, and it was unnecessarily kind of over the top, and that's where REI got bit. OAA got bit by that too. I understand they have to balance these kind of needs. They want to have a seat at the table. They don't want to be ostracized. There is fear, so I get trying to balance it. But that letter was just weird in the way it was put. Dear leader, kind of tone to it. The other thing too is REI again. A bad situation, they just everything they can to make it worse. They didn't put up the poll. They actually turned off comments to that. Yeah. So it's like that was just such a self-inflicted wound there of kind of what are we doing? Like everyone was on notice there. So that was just dumb. That was dumb. Again, bad situation. They're in a tough spot. But my goodness gracious. But I think you're spot on. Where is everybody else? Come on.
Yeah, I think this is, and I commented on a couple of threads last week on LinkedIn and kind of reflecting on it. What everyone listening to this needs to realize, and I'm sure you can be mad at the OAA, you can be mad at people for bikes and REI and all this stuff, is this is what this administration is doing, is that everything is a distraction. It's all about causing chaos and sowing, uncertainty within the groups who would oppose what they want to do. These organizations are definitely in a rock and a hard place. It should absolutely been a little more tempered. You guys are both right on that. At the same time, if they don't do the things that historically they have done, Dave, to your point, they don't get a seat at the table. I think if you talk about the OAA specifically, Owen, you nailed it. Where are the brands? I mean, the OAA represents brands, right? Their members are the brands. So, why are they going to stick their neck out at this point if their brands are telling them to, right? So it's kind of like if you start to see the brands speak up, you'll probably see other people speak up as well. I think for me, the takeaway here is that letter was going to happen in some form, no matter what. And yeah, we can criticize.
He probably was the best of a bad lot, quite frankly, because there wasn't going to be nobody was going to get the Trump nomination that wasn't going to support the drill baby drill, right? I mean, and all that stuff was already written and ready to go. It's not like Doug got in there and in a couple of weeks came up with this brilliant idea. No, that stuff has been done and written for months.
He passed through committee and the Senate with flying. I mean, he actually, I read somewhere that he had apparently one of the highest vote totals for approval of any Secretary of the Interior, maybe in history or in recent history at least. Right. So it wasn't like all the Dems were lining against him and trying to block this. So again, you put that against, and again, under the cover of, you could have toned down the tenor.
Under the cover of it, the vote they just took was for Matt Gaetz. So it's not like you're really comparing that.
Gaetz to this guy. This guy looks pretty good.
Absolutely.
But that all talks to this administration resetting what is normal, right? To the point where it's like, okay, here's batshit crazy over here. So now we're just going to give mildly crazy. You're like, yeah, it sounds great. Let's do that.
Just batshit.
Right.
right. We just took it's just batshit. No, and I think that's it. So I think the people who get up in arms, you want to hold people account, I get it. But really, the fight is not this, ultimately, I think, in the next, 4 years. The fight is kind of like, how do we protect the public lands? How do we make sure that we're holding people account when we can? And I think that should be the takeaway, and I'd like to see that narrative change a little bit more that way. It's a tough situation, no matter how you cut it.
Right. Don't attack the people that are actually trying to help. Attack the people that are attacking what you love.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And okay, hold people to a high standard, right? But by the same token, infighting amongst the people that are trying to do the right things is exactly what the folks that are trying to come after public lands love. It's like, you beat each other up totally and call each other out for not passing some purity tests. But guess what? The real fight is outside the industry. It shouldn't be inside the industry.
And this is a long time honored tradition of this infighting in the outdoor industry. We talk about it all the time, right? About the snowmobilers versus snow skiers and RVers versus mountain bikers and it's constant. And this is the time we have to put that aside and act in the best interests of the outdoors and public lands. And that's just where we are. All right, guys, we can wrap it up there. Come back on this Wednesday to hear Justin Hausman and I run through some outdoor adventure headlines. And then we'll come back again on Friday to talk about the Outdoor Market Alliance Media event, whatever they call it. Also, check out the latest on the Rock Fight Podcast Network. Open Container, Doug Schnitzbahn hosts Open Container. You can find that podcast right where you found this podcast. The Rock Fight's a production of Rock Fight LLC. Our producer today, Producer David Karstad. Art direction provided by Sarah, the most popular person on LinkedIn, Gensert. For Eoin Comerford, I'm Colin True. Thanks for listening, and here to take us out is our guy Krista Makes with the Rock Fight song. We'll see you next time, Rock Fighters.
Rock fight.